I want you to know that it's possible to get accepted to your Master of Social Work even if you have a low GPA. If you're new here, hi, my name is Michelle, and I'm the founder of MSW Helper, which is a resource hub for people who are applying specifically to the Master of Social Work program. We help applicants increase their confidence by helping them write personal statements that stand out. And one of the biggest worries that our clients come to us with is stress about whether their grades will hinder their ability to get accepted to Master of Social Work programs. And I totally understand the worry because MSW programs are quite competitive. And so if you have a lower GPA relative to your peers, you might worry about whether you even have a chance of getting accepted to the program. However, in my experience, I find that schools of social work are so much more interested in you as an overall person versus just the numbers or the GPA behind your name. And over the years, I have seen people get accepted to Master of Social Work programs even though they had a relatively low GPA because they were able to show the admissions committee why they would be an asset to the program. And schools of social work typically tell you themselves that their application process is holistic. They are not just looking at one thing when assessing your application. They're trying to get a sense of you as a whole person and assess your application based off of many different factors. And that's why the application process usually comprises of your transcripts, your resume, your references, and of course, your personal statement. And sometimes those numbers or the stats behind your name really don't tell the full story. One example I really love to give is, think about someone who has a perfect GPA. Maybe they have a 4.0 and they just have, a perfect transcript. But the reason that they have that perfect transcript is because school was all they did. They never were involved in any extracurriculars, they never got any volunteer experiences, and they never had to work while they were in university. Meanwhile, another applicant might have a slightly lower GPA, but they were super involved while they were in school. Or maybe they had to work, or maybe they went through something really challenging and, that experience that they went through had an impact on their grades, but in return, they learned skills and resilience and all different things that are going to help them in their career as a social worker. So that's what I mean when I say that programs are holistic. Those are the kind of things that aren't always reflected in your GPA. And so that's why the personal statement is so important. It allows you to tell the reader your story and really control the narrative. When I applied to my Master of Social Work, I often found myself on forums trying to compare myself to other applicants. More specifically, I would be comparing my grades and asking them how much experience they had and really trying to get a comparison of where I stood compared to other applicants. But the reason that that doesn't work is that it's really never an apples to apples comparison. We all have such different strengths and like areas of consideration that it makes it really hard to like fully grasp like how we compare to other applicants. Kind of like in that example, right? You might be comparing yourself to somebody who has a perfect GPA, but they never had to work. They never were involved in anything. And if you don't know that about them, you're comparing yourself based off of something that really doesn't show the full picture. And so, even though it's hard, I really encourage you to try not to compare yourself to anybody else and instead stay in your own lane and really focus on your own strengths and your own skills and your own potential and really focus on selling yourself in your application. So let's talk about how you should approach your application if you do have a low GPA. The first thing I might consider is where your GPA stands compared to the cutoff. Generally, most schools will provide expectations around like the minimum GPA required. And if you are far below that GPA cutoff, you might want to look into some other schools that have more flexible GPA requirements. Um, and and then if you are closer to the cutoff and you're worried because it's a competitive program, and even though you technically meet the grades requirements, I think it's really important to acknowledge that in your application. Sometimes schools of social work will actually give you space to talk about areas in your application that you're worried about, specifically like a lower GPA. So if they are providing that space in the application, I would definitely acknowledge it. And this is what I usually recommend to people if they do decide to talk about their low GPA in their personal statement. So my first tip is to use neutral language. Don't make any judgments about yourself or your application when you are talking about a low GPA. Sometimes this is a really simple shift in language. So instead of saying, I acknowledge that my GPA was lower than my peers and my grades were bad, and assigning value to the fact that your GPA was lower, say something super neutral. Maybe something along the lines of, there was a semester where my grades were lower than usual. And the reason that you want to use neutral language is that your personal statement is really meant to be a place to talk about your strengths and skills and potential. So you don't really want to put too much emphasis on deficits or saying anything negative about yourself. So even if you are addressing a low GPA, you should do so in a way that is as neutral as possible. My second tip is to keep your discussion brief. Like I said, the personal statement is really meant to be about the positives of your application, your skills, strengths, and potential. And if you spend too much time talking about the deficits, you're wasting valuable word count on areas where you could be like selling yourself and talking about all the amazing things about you. So if you do decide to address your grades, you want to keep it very neutral and keep it brief. So you might say something along the lines of, there was a semester where my grades were lower than usual because of a hardship that I went through. So after being neutral and brief, when talking about your GPA, the next step is to focus on skills and resilience. So, for example, you might talk about how your GPA was lower than usual because of a hardship that you went through. But that experience, that hardship, is going to make you a more empathetic and understanding social worker. So really trying to pull out the positives of the situation and talk about what you gained out of that experience rather than what you lacked or lost, which in this case is your lower GPA. And the last thing I want to highlight is the importance of focusing on your strengths. You actually might decide not to address your low GPA depending on your situation, right? Like if you had one semester where your GPA was a little lower in your early university days, really look at the whole picture of your application. And instead of drawing attention to like a deficit in your application, what can you really lean into? Can you talk about your wealth of experience or other really positive parts of your application and focus on really showing the admissions committee that you have the skills, strengths, and potential to thrive in the program? So those are some very practical strategies for addressing a low GPA in your personal statement for your Master of Social Work application. But I want you to know that truly, over the years, I have supported so many applicants who came to me and their biggest worry was their low GPA. And together, we were able to really focus on writing a personal statement that really leaned into their strengths rather than highlighting their deficits. And it, the personal statement really is a tool that you can use to show the admissions committee, you as a whole person, that your GPA honestly just can't do. And schools of social work know that, right? That's why they ask for the personal statement, is because they really want to get a picture of who you are in a way that the numbers behind your name never could. If you visit the MSW Helper website, there are a ton of free resources that you can use to make your application stand out, or you can work with us directly and we can edit and critique your personal statement to check your blind spots and make sure that everything you say is really aligned with what the program is actually looking for. Overall, if you are worried about your GPA in your overall application, I hope that this video has made you feel a little bit more relieved and a little bit more empowered, knowing that you can use your personal statement to really control the narrative and tell your own story. If you have any questions, definitely let us know in the comments and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.